So one of the most interesting parts of this Drake versus Kendrick beef, to me, has been how many of our hip-hop elders have come out low to medium key hating on it. In the past couple of weeks, we've seen Ed Lover,
just straight corny, son.
Big Daddy Kane.
It just wasn't exciting to me.
Ice Cube, which is especially interesting.
I don't really like seeing rappers beef.
And the one that really set my timeline on fire, which was this, perhaps a tad bit dramatic post from Questlove. So as a certified old head myself who's been doing hip-hop radio since 1991, I'd like to speak to you today on behalf of my people. Because I did enjoy parts of this beef, and I think some of these guys like Ed Lover just weren't paying attention, but the other ones, I feel like I do understand where they're coming from. And even Questlove, although I don't agree with what he said, I do think I kind of understand what he was feeling. So I'm just going to break down real quick what I did enjoy about this beef and what my rickety old head spirit had some questions about. So first things first, obviously hip-hop is not dead because of this beef. If we're still here after 12 Tom MacDonald albums, nothing is gonna kill us. Hip-hop will still be here, all beautiful and chaotic and containing multitudes, long after you and I are dead and gone. And this beef itself was many things at once. It was dark, it was grimy, it was a family dinner that descends into spiteful bickering until everyone just walks home staring at the ground in icy cold silence. And it was also, if you could stomach that side of it, some of the best hip-hop theater I've ever seen in my life. I mean, come on, that night that Family Matters and Meet the Grams dropped back to back, I'm gonna be on my deathbed looking back on that as the last time I felt truly alive. And contrary to what Questlove said, I think this battle did have a winner, and a very clear loser. I already see you Drake fans out there retreating into your MAGA posture and committing to a lifetime of denial, but Kendrick out-barred him, out-angled him, out-strategized him, out-sociological critiqued him, out-charted him, out-make them dance at the clubbed him. And if you think I'm saying this from a place of bias, look, the only bias I have is that I really, really don't like Drake. So yeah, I came to this drama with a very clear bias towards both sides that made the whole arc of the drama very satisfying for the parts of me that enjoyed it. But when the beef first started, I wasn't just rooting for Kendrick to kill that man. My initial perspective was I was just excited to see a back and forth from two of the best rappers in the game, who represent two very different visions of what a rapper could be, but are both cut from that cloth where they are committed to being the best at this craft and are ready and willing to prove it with some good-ass rapping, which is the type of beef this was until it became way more than that. And the further it got from that kind of friendly fade, as Kendrick put it, the more conflicted I started feeling about the whole thing. My generation, we just grew up on a different type of beef than this. And for a lot of us, Kendrick versus Drake, much as I did enjoy it, did also kind of feel like rap beef's final descent into madness. So before we get started, I want to be clear that none of what I'm about to say applies to all young people or all older people. And I also have to acknowledge that rap beef has always been messy. Casual misogyny and homophobia have been a constant on classic diss tracks since at least The Bridge Is Over, on which KRS-One brought a teenage Roxanne Shante into it, even though she hadn't even said anything. She was just a woman affiliated with the other side. Time is a flat circle. So there's always been a few things we had to compartmentalize, and there's probably a lot of stuff in those classic beefs that I wouldn't digest the same way now. But I think the first obvious generational divide is back then with those 1980s beefs, half the time we weren't even totally clear on what the beef was about. And even if there was an official reason on paper, we all understood it was really just about showing your skills and seeing who's the nicest. And even a little later on with stuff like Ice Cube versus NWA that had more clear-cut grievances, there was never really a sense that we needed to worry too much about it getting more serious. Up until we witnessed the killings of Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace. For younger people who grew up in a post-Big and Pac world and the specter of death hanging over every beef is all they've ever known, I think it's just a little easier to take the possibility of a beef going too far for granted as part of the game. And I'm not saying that to judge. I think it's only natural. But people who lived through the trauma of those back-to-back loss of innocence moments are just gonna tense up a little more easily when the beef starts getting weird. Another huge tectonic shift that's happened more gradually is how the internet has just warped everything about how we relate to art and celebrity in general. And I actually saw a video with Alchemist talking about this beef that got at one part of that change pretty well.
I mean, it's definitely interesting. You know what I'm saying? I'm tuned in. I like to see what it is, but it's pretty crazy now. It's like they want blood. Everybody wants blood. It's like, it reminds me of Gladiators.
Yeah,
like,
right.
You know what I'm saying? I don't remember it being this like hourglass or like, it's been 3 days. It's been 4 days. Imagine you're the artist. Now you got to run there and to appease an internet of people who may, after you do it, go, it's trash. Or, okay, let's see what's next.
Right.
It's this constant gladiator, like, you know, they want more. So I'm listening. I'm watching.
After Jay-Z dropped Takeover, it took Nas 3 months to come back with Ether. But nowadays, if you go 2 weeks without giving the internet that next dopamine hit, you damn near lost already. The need to keep feeding that online appetite makes it so much easier for things to get weird a lot faster. Because there's so much pressure to just keep escalating and less time to consider the ramifications of what you're doing. I feel like Drake might have done a couple of things differently if he had a little more time to think, and also make sure he understood Kendrick's lyrics that he was building half a song around.
You saying Kendrick said this? He didn't say that.
But the biggest difference by far between the old days and this internet age is that back in the days, we really didn't know much about any of these rappers beyond what we heard in the music. And that meant there was only so much you could say about somebody if you did a diss track about them. And whatever you did say, we never really knew what was true or not. So we basically just listened to both sides talk their shit and decided whose shit talk we liked better. It was a nice, simple, low-stakes listening experience.
It's like if the line is dope and he dissed you, it's dope, man. In my days of battling people, I've said stuff about people that ain't true, but it was funny as hell. You laughed and enjoyed it, you know?
But in this social media era that's defined by everyone knowing way too much about everybody, or feeling like they do, rap beef has been shifting more and more from low-stakes shit-talking into this whole elaborate propaganda war, where both sides gather all types of information and build a whole dossier about their opponent. And then in order to make sense of the beef, we gotta analyze this whole Pepe Sylvia corkboard and figure out what we actually think is true or not.
It's not a competitive thing about who spit the better bars. It's a thing about fact checking to see if this person told the truth.
And compared to the old style of beef, that's just like a lot of work, man. That's a lot of stress, especially when the contents of the dossier just keep getting darker and heavier with every beef. The one right before this with Story of Adidon set a clear standard that the way you really win a beef now is not just talking shit, but exposing some shit. And this one took us further than we've ever gone with using this game that was built for low-stakes shit-talking to have conversations that feel like they might be too heavy for this game to carry. We may never know how much of this beef was about strategy and how much was about years of seething contempt, but you could see right away that both sides came fully prepared for the post-Adidon style of beef. Kendrick was warning Drake from the outset not to press that Adidon button and bring family into it, and Drake, who probably internalized that Adidon standard more than anyone, said, yes, I will press the button, and from then on it pretty literally turned into a propaganda war. And when I say propaganda, I don't mean that either side's being dishonest necessarily, because propaganda can be used equally for truth or lies. These guys might both fully believe all their allegations about each other, but the thing is, in the context of this beef, they weren't really trying to substantiate or prove the allegations as much as they were just trying to win the war by making the allegations sound believable or even just sound catchy. Which is one thing if we're talking about whether Kendrick has a bad contract or Drake takes Ozempic, but when we cross over into playing that game with these types of accusations, that feels a little different to me. And in my view, one side was a lot more persuasive because Kendrick had better strategy and Drake had a lot more red flags to work with. But we still didn't really come away from this knowing what to think about either side. And I don't know, to me, that just feels a little weird. As the ending of a movie, it was great, but in real life, I'm not totally comfortable with this. There's been plenty of beefs that got ugly before and even crossed over into violence. But when I look at what this beef had us doing as listeners, we were really up here listening to some songs on which these two men accuse each other of physically abusing their wife and grooming underage girls with every impression they were dead ass serious about it. And then millions of people used these songs to decide who they believed for the purpose of keeping score in a game. that when the game was over, we all just said, hey, good game, and then walked away, still not knowing what was what with any of those allegations. That's not a little extra weird to you? I'm not judging anybody because I kept watching too, but that's not a little extra dark to you? I mean, if either side of this is true, that means there are victims involved. There are survivors. Is this how they would want to resolve this situation? Do they get a say in this? I'm not saying I know the answer, but for me, as a listener, this feels like we've moved past the kind of conversation that should be adjudicated by a rap beef. And there was a moment on that Sunday night when I sat there listening to Drake sound so defensive and creepy on the Heart Part 6 that this whole thing just started feeling a little too heavy for me. And I think I might have been feeling a little bit of what Questlove was feeling. And then on Monday morning, I went right back to listening to every BBL Drizzy freestyle and every clip of Not Like Us being played outside. I've always said that compartmentalization is the sixth element of hip-hop, and I don't know, it could be that hypocrisy is the seventh. When I look back on Drake versus Kendrick, I'm gonna remember how it brought Black Twitter together for one last glorious ride, how it had millions of young people sitting here analyzing these high-level bars, aka every middle-aged backpacker's dream. There's a lot about this beef that I'm gonna remember fondly. But I also kind of hope it's true that this is the last time we'll have two MCs cut from this cloth at the top of the game again, and that means this is the last classic beef we're ever going to see. Because if the pendulum is going to keep swinging even further into this moral quagmire, if the next beef after this is going to be a new track dropping every 6 hours accusing each other of the Jonestown massacre, I am too old for this shit. The story of Adidon changed people's expectations for how to judge a beef. Exactly.